Drowning in silence, the water torture of the Middle Ages. Welcome, brave souls, to Tales Labyrinth. Tonight, we journey into the cold, damp dungeons of the past to uncover a horror that preys upon our most primal fears. Prepare for Drowning in Silence, the water torture of the Middle Ages. If you are drawn to the darkness of history, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Now, hold your breath, for you are about to witness a tale of medieval terror that will leave you gasping long after it is over. Segment 1. The Water Cure. Known as the toka, or water cure, this torture was a masterpiece of psychological cruelty. It left no visible scars, no broken bones, only a shattered mind and a spirit drowned in terror. Its brilliance lay in its simplicity, using the body's own desperate need for air as its weapon. The procedure began by forcing a piece of cloth, often linen or silk, deep down the victim's throat. This act alone was terrifying, a violation that induced panic and gagging. The fabric acted as a conduit, preparing the way for the slow, agonizing torment that was about to unfold. With the cloth in place, water was poured slowly into the victim's mouth. It saturated the fabric, which then swelled to block the airway completely. The victim could not breathe, could not scream, and could only experience the horrific, visceral sensation of drowning while still fully conscious on dry land. The process was cyclical. The torturers would pour, wait for the victim to convulse in a desperate, silent struggle for air, and then pause, allowing a single gasping breath. This brief respite was not mercy. It was a calculated act designed to amplify the terror of the next cycle. The body would be overwhelmed by the primal, biological panic of suffocation. The heart would pound, the lungs would burn, and the mind would fracture under the stress. It was a state of living death, a horrifying limbo between breathing and drowning, repeated until the victim's will was completely broken. Hallucinations would often begin, the oxygen-starved brain creating phantoms in the torchlit darkness. The victim might confess to anything, admit to any crime, just to make the feeling of water filling their lungs stop. The line between reality and nightmare dissolved into a gurgling, watery abyss. This scarless torture was favored because it left the victim physically intact for further questioning or public execution. Their body was merely a vessel for their mind, and it was the mind that inquisitors sought to utterly dominate, drown, and destroy with this simple yet profoundly evil method. Segment 2. The Drowning Rack. The setting for this horror was often a specialized device, a slanted board or rack built for maximum helplessness. The victim was bound tightly, their hands and feet restrained, preventing any struggle. Their head was secured at the lowest point, ensuring the water would pool and choke them effectively. This inverted position amplified the terror. Blood would rush to the head, creating a disorienting, pounding pressure that compounded the panic of suffocation. Gravity became an accomplice to the torturer, pulling the water deeper into the throat and lungs, making every natural instinct to resist feel completely and utterly futile. The rack itself was a symbol of cold, indifferent cruelty. It was often a crude wooden structure, stained and warped from countless sessions. The sight of it alone was enough to instill profound fear in prisoners, who knew the agonizing ordeal it promised even before the first drop of water fell. Being bound to the rack was a total surrender of control. The victim was completely at the mercy of their tormentors, unable to move, unable to fight back, a passive recipient of a slow, suffocating death. This absolute powerlessness was a key component of the psychological destruction it was designed to inflict. The cold, hard wood pressed against their back, a constant, uncomfortable reminder of their grim reality. The tight ropes would cut into their wrists and ankles, but this pain was a distant distraction from the overwhelming, all-consuming horror that was building in their throat with every passing dreadful moment. As the water was poured, the victim's body would arch and buck against the restraints in a futile, spasmodic dance of survival. The rack held them fast, transforming their own desperate struggles into a powerless spectacle for the impassive eyes of the inquisitors who were watching them suffer in the gloom. Even after the torture ended, the memory of the rack lingered. It became a supernatural anchor for their trauma, a dark altar upon which their spirit had been sacrificed. The feeling of the wet wood and tight ropes would haunt their nightmares, a physical echo of their psychological drowning and despair. Segment 3. The suffocating cloth. The piece of cloth was the foul heart of this particular torment. It was an object of profound dread, a simple scrap of fabric transformed into a gatekeeper of life and death. Forcing it into the victim's throat was an act of intimate violence, the first step into a waking nightmare. As the water soaked the cloth, its texture changed. It became heavy, slimy and swollen, a grotesque mass expanding to fill every space, cutting off all air. The victim could feel it slide deeper, a suffocating plug that seemed to have a life of its own, a creature crawling down their throat. The psychological impact of this internal invasion was immense. It felt as though the torture was happening from the inside out, a violation of the body's most private space. The mind reeled at the foreign presence, this wet, suffocating intruder that it was completely powerless to expel from within. The cycle of pouring and pausing was a sadistic rhythm of terror. That brief moment when the cloth was partially removed, allowing a single desperate gasp, was the cruelest part. It was a taste of life dangled before a dying man, only to be snatched away again, amplifying their despair. The gurgling sounds were horrific, the only noise the victim could make. It was the sound of their own life being extinguished, a wet, rattling struggle that echoed in the stone chamber. To the torturers, it was the sound of progress, a sign that the victim's will was dissolving. This method was a form of psychological conditioning. The cloth became a trigger for absolute panic. In future sessions, the mere sight of the torturer holding the cloth was often enough to elicit a confession, the mind reliving the suffocation before the torture even began, breaking under the weight of memory. Afterward, the victim's throat would be raw, their voice a hoarse whisper, but the real damage was unseen. The cloth left a phantom sensation, a permanent feeling of something lodged in their throat. A constant physical reminder of the moment they were drowned by a simple piece of fabric. Segment 4. The Lake of Witches. A different form of water torture was performed in public, under the open sky. The ordeal by water, often using a cucking stool or dunking chair, was a terrifying spectacle designed for humiliation and a grim test of faith, most famously used during the frenzied medieval witch hunts. The accused, usually a woman branded as a witch, was strapped firmly into a chair at the end of a long wooden beam. The beam was balanced on the bank of a river or lake, allowing the torturers to plunge the victim into the cold, murky water below with ease. The logic behind this ordeal was cruelly paradoxical and steeped in dark superstition. If the victim drowned, she was considered innocent, her soul accepted by God and cleansed by the water. If she floated, the water was said to have rejected her, proving her guilt and condemning her to be executed. The crowd's reaction was a key part of the terror. They would jeer, scream, and celebrate the spectacle, their faces a blur of morbid excitement. For the victim, it was a profoundly isolating experience, being tormented not in a secret dungeon, but before the hateful eyes of their own community. Being plunged into the freezing water was a violent shock to the system. The cold would steal the breath, and the murky depths would bring disorientation and panic. Pulled up, gasping, sputtering, and freezing, the victim would be plunged back under again and again until a judgment was reached. The terror was not just of drowning, but of the supernatural implications. The accused was trapped between a physical death and a spiritual one. To survive was to be condemned as a servant of evil, while to die was the only way to prove one's innocence in the end. This public ritual reinforced the power of the accusers and the pervasive fear of witchcraft. The lake became a stage for cultural darkness, its waters a vessel for the community's paranoia. The victim was a sacrifice, their suffering a brutal confirmation of the dark forces believed to haunt their world. Segment 5. Echoes in the Well. One of the most terrifying forms of imprisonment involved the use of oubliettes, or deep, abandoned castle wells. Prisoners were simply dropped into the darkness, left to contemplate their fate in a vertical tomb where the walls were cold, slick stone, and the only way out was up. The fall itself was terrifying, a plunge into an unknown, lightless void. The landing, often in a pool of stagnant, freezing water and filth, was a brutal shock. The prisoner was now trapped, their world reduced to a small circle of sky far above, a cruel mockery of freedom. The psychological torment of this confinement was absolute. The sensory deprivation, the unending darkness, and the constant damp chill would slowly unravel the mind. The prisoner would hear phantom whispers in the echoing drip of water, their sanity fraying with each passing hour in the suffocating, lonely blackness. The water level could be a passive instrument of torture. After heavy rains, the water in the well would slowly rise, bringing a gradual, terrifying threat of drowning. The prisoner would be forced to cling to the slick walls, watching the water inch higher, a slow-motion execution with no escape. Starvation and disease were constant companions in this dreadful place. The prisoner was often forgotten, left to waste away. The water they stood in was contaminated with their own filth, a breeding ground for sickness that would bring a slow and agonizing end in the miserable, oppressive darkness. The well became a supernatural space, a nexus of despair, where the spirits of those who died there were said to remain. New prisoners would speak of feeling unseen hands touching them from the water, or hearing the faint, sorrowful moans of those who had perished in the same watery grave before. To be condemned to the well was to be erased from the world. It was a sentence of slow decay, both physical and mental. Death by drowning, starvation, or madness was the only release, a final surrender in a place designed to be the ultimate expression of human despair and abandonment. Water, the element of life, was twisted by medieval cruelty into a profound instrument of death and psychological horror. From the simulated drowning of the water cure to the public spectacle of the dunking stool, it was used to break the mind and condemn the soul. This era shows us how human ingenuity, when shrouded in darkness and fear, can create unimaginable suffering. Which form of this torment did you find the most terrifying? Let us know in the comments and subscribe to Tales Labyrinth. For more explorations of historical horror, a haunted monastery is waiting and its bells are about to toll for you.